Hi, everyone. Welcome to the LGB Alliance USA News Roundup for the week ending in May 30th, 2025. We are here with Jos, Sylvia, and me, Arianne. First, a summary of the news. The American Psychiatric Association discusses pediatric transition in its annual conference. California is under investigation for Title IX violations. The U.S. Supreme Court reinstates Maine lawmakers' voting rights amid women's sports debate. The U.S. Supreme Court declines to hear the two-gender T-shirt case. Corporations ditch pride. New York City Pride is financially struggling. An update on attacks on gay men in New York bars. And a lesbian is attacked inside an Illinois McDonald's. First, we'll start with the American Psychiatric Association, which held its annual conference in Los Angeles on March 17th to the 21st. According to reporting by Benjamin Ryan, the conference had two panels regarding pediatric gender medicine, one pro and one con. These two panels were amongst only 3 panels at the conference the media was banned from, and recordings were also forbidden from being taken. However, one of these panels, namely the May 19th panel featuring proponents of pediatric transition, was live-streamed by LGB Courage Coalition on X. Also, Ben Ryan obtained recordings of the forbidden panels. According to Ryan's Substack, the Skeptics panel included Dr. Kathleen McDevitt, a Baylor College of Medicine psychiatrist, who accused WPATH of scientific misconduct for its standards of care. Joining her on the panel was Dr. Stephen Levine, a former chair of WPATH, who has since testified in favor of state bans on pediatric transition, as well as Christopher Kaliebe, a psychiatric professor at UCF Health at Tampa. Ryan also obtained a video of Dr. Dan Karasik, WPATH leader and professor emeritus of psychiatry at UCSF, and he was complaining about the Skeptics panel. He said there is a conspiracy of right-wing billionaires funding the effort against pediatric transition and singled out the groups Do No Harm and the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. Karasik also accused the LGB Courage Coalition's leader, Jamie Reed, of harassment. Reed was kicked out of the conference. Reed responded by saying, quote, "On May 19th, Mr. Dan Karasik decided to loudly and publicly voice his complaints to the APA Legal General Counsel Colleen Coyle and the panelists in a public open room. His lack of judgment and arrogance was startling. This was an open space and not an appropriate venue for such accusations regarding the previous day's panel. He had no idea who was sitting around him and showed a real lack of decorum. Instead of acknowledging how he created a hostile environment before the panel began, he made unsubstantiated claims about our organization's finances." Unquote. Ryan also reported on the panel in support of pediatric transition, including LGBTQ-focused psychiatrist Dr. Jack Drescher, legal expert Brad Sears from the William Institute at UCLA, and Dr. Scott Leibowitz, one of the USA's leading psychiatrist specialists in pediatric transition. Ryan noted that Leibowitz was surprisingly even-handed in his speech, praising both WPATH and the CAST review alike. And we'll have links to Ryan's Substack reporting in the show notes. It would seem to me that this conference is a step forward in that the APA at least hosted a panel acknowledging voices critical of pediatric transition. But it's also a step backwards in that the APA tried to keep the discussion secret and that the dialogue met resistance. Hopefully, at least, it's a sign that the cracks in the medical professional establishment are showing when it comes to medicalizing gender nonconforming youth. Will medical professionals be able to guide their organizations to meaningful change on this issue from the inside, or will more pressure need to be applied from the legislation and legal side? We'll see. And now for some sports news from California. On Tuesday, May 27th, President Donald Trump threatened on X to withdraw funding from California for allowing trans-identified males on female sports teams. He appeared to be referencing a particular case of A.B. Hernandez, a trans-identifying boy who competes on the girls' track team for Jurupa Valley High School in Southern California. On May 17th, Hernandez won the CIF Southern Section Division III Girls Championship in the triple jump and long jump. Hernandez won the same event again in the CIF Masters meet and qualified for the CIF State Championship at Buchanan High School in Clovis on May 30th to 31st. That same day that Trump made his announcement, the CIF, that is the California Interscholastic Federation, announced the launch of a pilot program that would expand the finals to allow the next highest qualifying biological female athlete to compete. The CIF also confirmed in a follow-up statement the next day, May 28th, quote, a biological female student athlete who would have earned a specific placement on the podium will also be awarded the medal for that place, and the results will be reflected in the recording of the event, unquote. It would appear that this new CIF policy is damage control, designed to ward off potential legal trouble from the Trump administration. And in fact, on that same day, May 28th, the U.S. Justice Department announced an investigation into the CIF and Jurupa Unified School District over its women's sports policies and announced support for a similar lawsuit in Riverside County. The DOJ quotes Harmeet Dillon, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, as saying, quote, Title IX exists to protect women and girls in education. It is perverse to allow males to compete against girls, invade their private spaces, and take their trophies. This division will aggressively defend women's hard-fought rights to equal educational opportunities, end quote. This statement also quotes Attorney Bill Asaley, quote, the law is clear. Discrimination on the basis of sex is illegal and immoral. My office and the rest of the Department of Justice will work tirelessly to protect girls' sports and stop anyone, public officials included, from violating women's civil rights, unquote. I know that I, and I'm sure a lot of other people, are curious to see how California Governor Gavin Newsom responds to this lawsuit, as he has conceded earlier in an interview that he thought it was unfair that males were on female sports teams. However, he hasn't followed up on those remarks in substance. This would be an opportunity for him to act and possibly bolster his future political career ambition. As the Democrats continue to dig in their heels on the trans issue, Newsom could carve out a lane as a maverick, but who knows what his next moves are. We'll keep you updated. And with that, I hand it to you, Sylvia.
Thanks, Arianne. In a significant decision on Tuesday, the Supreme Court temporarily restored the voting rights of Maine State Representative Laurel Libby, a Republican from Auburn, pending the outcome of her legal challenge against the censure imposed by the Maine House of Representatives. The censure followed a February Facebook post in which Libby identified and criticized a trans-identified male high school athlete who won a girls' pole vault event. The Maine House barred her from voting or speaking on the floor until she apologized, which she refused to do. Libby challenged the censure in federal court, arguing it violated her First Amendment rights and disenfranchised her constituents. After lower courts denied her request for relief, the Supreme Court granted an emergency order allowing her to vote while the case proceeds. Justice Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented, expressing concerns about the court's use of emergency interventions. Libby, a vocal advocate for women's sports, expressed concern over the inclusion of trans-identified male athletes in female competitions, citing potential unfair advantages due to physiological differences. Her stance coincides with the national opinion that males do not belong in female sports. Silencing elected officials because their views don't align with the majority sends a dark message. If you speak up about controversial issues, especially ones that challenge current narratives, you'll be shut down. That is not democracy. That is control. In a healthy society, we need open dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable. It's through tough conversations and honest disagreement that people grow, challenge assumptions, and find common ground. Shutting people out doesn't change minds, it hardens divisions. It's worth remembering that the LGB movement made real progress not by shouting people down, but by showing up, telling the truth about our lives, and having the hard conversations. We didn't bully the public into changing. We changed hearts and minds through visibility, dialogue, and persistence. It took courage, not censorship. That's the difference. Today's gender ideology and trans movement feels like the opposite. Question anything, and you're branded as a bigot, shut out, or punished. But progress that relies on silencing dissent isn't progress at all. It's fear disguised as virtue. Real change happens when people talk, listen, and are free to disagree without being erased. That's how the LGB community earned respect. Now, a follow-up on the two genders shirt Supreme Court case. Liam Morrison was a 7th grader at Nichols Middle School in Middleborough, Massachusetts, when he decided to wear a shirt to school that read, "There are only two genders." This sparked major controversy when, by his first period class, he was instructed to take the shirt off or he could not return to class. He spoke at the school board meeting the next week and complained about the free speech suppression. The Massachusetts Family Institute caught wind of his story and enlisted to help him fight back. Cut to May 2023, and Liam's family, along with the MFI and ADF, filed a lawsuit against the school district for, quote, violating Liam's First Amendment rights, end quote. This case made its way to the U.S. Court of Appeals, which agreed with the original verdict, siding with the Middleborough School District. Liam does not have the right to wear the shirt in school. When Liam and his lawyers requested the Supreme Court hear his case, it was declined, thus ending Liam's fight for his freedom of speech to wear the two genders shirt to school. The two judges who dissented from the decision to deny hearing Liam's case were Justice Alito and Justice Thomas. In a statement about the case, Alito wrote, quote, "This case presents an issue of great importance for our nation's youth, whether public schools may suppress students' speech either because it expresses a viewpoint that the school disfavors or because of vague concerns about the likely effect of the speech on the school atmosphere or on the students who find the speech offensive." Next, this Pride season, some companies say they will not be participating in the external events, i.e. Pride marches, and in some cases have even pulled their funding for such events. Gravity research suggests as many as 2 in 5 companies have diminished their donations to Pride Month. Some examples: Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis and Diageo in San Francisco have declined to sponsor this year's Pride, and PepsiCo will not be returning to the New York City Pride this year. The changes in Pride engagement is likely due to a couple of factors: economic uncertainty relating to tariffs, but more so, the ever-apparent polarization made evident by the mixed opinions of the Trump administration's crackdown on DEI policies. For corporate America, participation in Pride Month may do more harm for business than good. Does this mean that these companies hate gay people? Absolutely not. According to Gravity Research, most companies retain their workplace activities and partnerships with employee resource groups. This suggests, quote, "Pride engagement isn't disappearing, it's being re-engineered. As polarization deepens, brands are favoring lower profile, internally focused strategies that minimize public exposure while signaling commitment to employees," end quote. It looks like the organizers of Pride will have to search for alternative sponsors to ensure that their party can continue as before. And with more on that, I'll give it to Jos.
Thanks, Sylvia. Yeah, in more Pride-related news, Heritage of Pride, the organizers behind New York City's annual Pride festivities, have reported that the nonprofit is facing a $750,000 budget shortfall this year, even as total partnerships have risen. In a statement issued on May 21st, New York City Pride co-chairs revealed they've only reached 75% of their 2025 fundraising target, a gap that allegedly threatens the grandeur of floats, vendors, and performances, and also jeopardizes their grant program, which would provide $100,000 in aid to smaller local LGBTQ+ nonprofits. The funding lapse comes as major corporate sponsors like MasterCard, PepsiCo, as Sylvia mentioned, Nissan, Citi, and PricewaterhouseCoopers have either reduced their support or chosen not to renew their sponsorships for this year. Industry insiders and recent surveys suggest that the shift is a result of discontinued diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Despite these challenges, New York City Pride's signature events such as Pride Fest, the Pride March, and Youth Pride will move forward as planned. Heritage of Pride has kicked off a new fundraising campaign aiming to raise $25,000 to cover upcoming event costs. However, if the goal isn't met, organizers warn that some of the planned festivities may be downsized or canceled, a situation not unfamiliar from last year's cancellations of the Pride Rally and Pride Island Music Festival. When we think of this from a mathematical perspective, the sky doesn't seem to be falling. Based on the data provided and some simple calculations, here's some perspective. The budget shortfall of $750,000 represents 25% of the total fundraising goal. The other 75% then would be $2.25 million, with a total fundraising goal of $3 million. So they've already received $2.25 million. According to ProPublica, Heritage of Pride has had a wide range of revenues in the last 13 years of reporting. The revenues range from a low of just over $1 million in 2011 to a high of $13.2 million in 2019. The most recently reported data from 2022 and 2023 shows revenue of just over $5.5 million. So the fundraising goal for this year is already a little more than half of the revenues raised in 2022 and 2023, and it's still 3 times the revenues of 2011. And to be fair, there are a lot of events on NewYorkCityPride.org's website starting May 31st and running throughout the month of June. But many of these events are hosted by private businesses and smaller LGBTQ nonprofits. It's unclear to me how the funds are utilized beyond that stated $100,000 that the org filters to smaller local nonprofits. For me, the math just ain't mathin'. But Heritage of Pride organizers are certainly using the DEI-related shortfall to push for additional donations in the lead up to the kickoff of Pride Month. Plus, I'm adding the plus since it's not even just events for the month of June, but it's also dribbling into May as well. The real challenge is for small local communities to continue to host efforts, but let's be real, those celebrations were already organized on a shoestring and with more love than money by the people in the community who care enough to organize something in their city. And those sorts of Pride events are generally only a day and don't often feature the audacious shenanigans that we've seen documented time and time again at massive month-long Pride events, like what happens in New York City. I admittedly have a soft spot in my heart for those small local Pride gatherings. To be fair, I've had absolutely amazing times at Pride events, both extremely massive major metro events and extremely tiny local half-block long events. It just feels odd to read an article bemoaning a budget shortfall when the org has already generated $2.25 million. I personally encourage participation in Pride events, even if only as a participant observer. If you attend Pride this year, please share your experiences with us in the comments. And now more news from New York. We have an update to a case we previously reported on about gay men who were targets of a drugging and robbing scheme in New York City bars, resulting in the deaths of 2 gay men and the drugging assaults and thefts of countless others. The 3 men responsible for their deaths have been sentenced to decades in prison. Jaquan Hamilton, 37, and Robert DeMeo, 36, received 40 years to life, while Jacob Barroso, 32, was sentenced to 25 years to life for their roles in the crimes. The trio targeted victims in Manhattan's Hell's Kitchen neighborhood between March 2021 and June 2022, using lethal mix of drugs, including fentanyl, to incapacitate them before stealing thousands of dollars through their phones. Among the victims were Julio Ramirez, 25, and John Umberger, 33, who were found dead after encountering the perpetrators at local bars. Prosecutors revealed that Hamilton and DeMeo even recorded a video celebrating the robbery next to Umberger's lifeless body. The sentencing follows increased scrutiny of similar cases, with survivors accusing authorities of mishandling investigations. In fact, as you'll recall from our previous reporting on this story, the only reason police were able to solve this case was because the Ramirez and Umberger families doggedly pursued answers and fought for justice for their loved ones. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg condemned the crimes, stating that the defendant showed a wanton disregard for their victims. Of course, the trio's lawyers have pledged to appeal the verdict. And in more news about how homophobia wasn't solved when we got marriage equality in 2015, a 19-year-old lesbian woman, Katie Grass, was viciously attacked in a McDonald's in Carpentersville, Illinois, after two males allegedly hurled anti-gay slurs at her before launching the violent assault. The incident occurred on May 13th when Grass and her 13-year-old cousin stopped at the fast food restaurant after a choir concert. As she exited the restroom, a group of strangers began harassing her using derogatory language. When she walked away, the verbal abuse escalated into a physical attack. The suspects, John Camrad, 19, and a 16-year-old boy, allegedly punched and kicked Grass, leaving her with a fractured nose, a hemorrhage on her eye, and PTSD. Witnesses and surveillance footage confirmed the brutal beating. Following public outcry, Kane County prosecutors upgraded the charges against the attackers to include hate crimes, alongside aggravated battery and mob action. Kane County State's Attorney Jeremy Moser condemned the attack, stating that everyone deserves to feel safe in public spaces, and that such violence would be prosecuted to the fullest extent. Grass, who has spoken about the attack, said she believes the assailants intended to kill her. Camrad remains in custody while the juvenile suspect turned himself in. Both are expected to face trial in the coming months. With yet another reminder that homophobia has not been solved and that we still desperately need a sense of community, I'm curious about your thoughts on Pride, Arianne and Sylvia.
That's a really heartbreaking case, and I'm really glad that it was caught on camera and that the two assaulters can be put behind bars, hopefully for a very, very long time. I think it just is also a reminder of how many of these sorts of things happen that we don't end up finding out about. And just the motivation behind homophobia, it's there, it's been there in the past, and it's still here now. And I think having Pride, having a place for people who are same-sex attracted to go and feel like they are safe and a part of a majority rather than a minority is still important.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think for me, when I think of where I find pride is the most helpful are simply like in some small towns or just the idea that there's something that can pop up anywhere that can at least be a source of solace for people who are same-sex attracted, because it is true, we still do have actual homophobia in society. And I think it's really important that no matter where you are in the country, you know that there is something there that actually can be some sort of support for you. And I have found that some of my better experiences with pride related events have been in like some very low key small towns where there's just like some local cover band that has lots of lesbians in it and is singing some, old-fashioned rock song or something. So there are, I think, ways that pride can be done that actually is worthwhile and doesn't have to be like this whole massive corporate queer fest.
I think it's important to ask, what do those big pride events do to help people in those small towns? Like what the heck does having a vodka rager do for the young lesbians and young gay men who are isolated and alone in these small towns? It does absolutely nothing. What does having a month-long party do for the people who are in countries where they can be put to death for being same-sex attracted? It does absolutely nothing. And I know I just said visibility is important, and it is, but visibility is important in the places where you're not already visible. So it's like, I mean, I don't necessarily think that means we should take New York Pride and go to a small town and make New York Pride happen in a rural town, because that would just be terrible. I mean, maybe it would help their economy some. I don't know. I think about how what can it do real time to help the people who need it? I mean, maybe having a massive pride in a small town isn't the worst idea. I think about Woman's Land and how it's in a rural part of Michigan, and how back in its heyday, that rural town knew that this thing happened, knew that there was a bunch of lesbians going to this thing, and that no men were allowed. And it was kind of like oh, what's going on here? But it also gave them a ton of money because, thousands of women came from across the country and across the world to this small town and bought their groceries there. And, it was just a huge influx. So this small town began to be like, okay, well, we don't understand why all these like big butch women are here, but hey, they want to rent a lot of porta potties. Okay. Like that's an example of like real-time visibility that actually helps create bridges between people who are isolated and probably don't get a lot of interaction with radical feminist lesbians, and now, there's this symbiotic relationship. Whereas like that's not what Pride does now. It doesn't build bridges, and it I don't know. I don't like the idea that these big city party prides are like, I think the phrase is like a beacon on the hill for these, rural living, isolated homosexuals to like look at and be like, one day I can be there where I'm truly accepted. It's like, no, Pride Month should be about helping build acceptance in the places where it doesn't already exist, not just a party of like, look, we can, and don't get me started on like the KINK that goes on. That's a whole other conversation. But just what does Pride do to help create a world where young women aren't beat up because they're lesbian?
That's an excellent point about building bridges with local communities and like making it seem like this is something that is actually helping the local community. Because especially in a lot of these rural areas and places with small towns, they're actually really struggling. I've been not commenting on Pride per se, but there have been times where like I've been to a music festival in a small town in rural California, and it's like at that time like the only thing going on where like the local community can bring like their street vendor art or whatever to it, and otherwise the town would be really struggling. So I think that's an excellent point about how pride can help. Another train of thought I had, which is like a lot of these small towns are struggling with things like alcoholism and drug abuse, and I'm not sure that having all these alcohol companies sponsor Pride necessarily send the right message. I mean, I'm not trying to say that to sound like some sort of prude or anything. I'm just saying like we shouldn't make the economic engine of Pride so dependent on vodka.
Yeah, you both make really excellent points, and I really like that notion of visibility is important where you don't already have it, and that the experience is, as Arianne mentioned, so different between the small pride and the really large events that I haven't noticed the tendency to lean into the drinking aspect and the alcohol aspect as much in the smaller prides as it is just that running theme of corporate sponsors being initially, especially very heavily alcohol related companies that were supporting it. So those local pride events they're precious. To me, they're precious. And in one year where I attended the Pride in Orlando, we had a small one that was hosted by a gay man whose partner is a drag performer. And it's like that old school drag that's just kind of fun, lip syncing, whatever. It's not the insanity stuff. And it was just a really sweet time. And it was such a different experience of mingling with your local community versus being in a street with hundreds of thousands of people, cheering and screaming. And that was also really exciting and a fun time. But at that point, I didn't notice the trans takeover of everything as well. So one of the disappointing aspects of the New York City Pride is that there's this whole trans forward thing with the youth section of Pride. So that's a component that's unfortunate and to consider as well. But I personally do think Pride is important.
It does bother me that kind of you mentioned how all of these fundings are getting pulled and whatever. I honestly could care less, but the fact that what they're really maintaining and what they're making sure doesn't lose any funding is, like you said, the youth, the queer youth trans part, which just feels very nefarious to me. I don't know if that's the right word. Ominous. It feels wrong. Feels very like they're making conversion therapy the center of their whole pride shtick.
Yeah, it doesn't feel gay forward. It feels trans forward, especially when related to youth. It's weird to me. It stands out. It's conspicuous. It stands out that they're pushing the trans queer narrative a lot, especially for the youth.
Yeah, and I'd also say too, I mean I've seen that in San Francisco Pride. They actually have like Kaiser Permanente with booths about cross-sex hormones. It's really gross. But I was also gonna say I think Pride is another opportunity to maybe share history. I don't mean giving people history lessons that are going to be boring. Even if it's something like, you know how you go to a lot of these fairs and they'll have these old sort of antique items that they're selling. You know, there are a lot of ways you can help share, like, oh, did you know there was this gay person from this town? You know, like there are a lot of ways you can help gay people who are coming, particularly younger ones, connect to what was in the past Pride. And I think that would be another opportunity.
That's a really good point. I like that. We need to connect with our history. The whole point is to celebrate and to acknowledge the, like you said, the community and the people who that don't have that visibility. They have that visibility for that one day and that one moment. So it's really important.
Yes, Joss, I'd agree that it's about celebrating and being proud, not feeling shame. I think it's also a visibility and showing that same-sex attracted people are just like everybody else. We want family, we want a good career, we want to mind our business. And I think that there is a divide within the community about those who want to just go living their life and those who want to stand out and make being queer their whole personality. And they view the other side as, wanting to assimilate into straight culture. And in their mind, being queer is about subverting expectations and amplifying taboos and living on the edge and not assimilating, and think that that's not how liberation will come about. And if you find that interesting and would like to discuss whether or not assimilating into straight culture is a good goal for gay people, you can join our next LGB discussions group this Wednesday, June 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern, which is 7 p.m. Central and 5 p.m. Pacific time.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Phones are hard for me.
It is 5 p.m.
No, but in all seriousness, it's going to be a really interesting discussion, and I'd love to hear people's thoughts. And maybe assimilation isn't the right word, but come join us. You can join on the website lgballianceusa.org. And there's another meeting coming up too, right?
We have a host of different meetings. We have a bevy of different meetings each month. So the other meeting that we have coming up this Sunday is Lesbian Social Club. And that's for adult lesbians only. It's a single-sex group. And yeah, we encourage you to look at our website for all of the upcoming events that we have, lgbausa.org. And you can sign up for the events. Make sure that you have a registered Zoom account. This is free to do. All you have to do is make an account with Zoom and verify your credentials with Zoom, and your account will be authenticated or registered, and then use those same credentials to sign up for the events. We hope to see you at some of them.
And with that, thank you everyone for listening for watching this episode of our weekly news roundup, and we hope to see you again next week. Remember to like and subscribe. Bye.